You know who's a great guy? Mike Carparelli. If you go to carparelligutars.com, he'll send you some of the best guitar components money can buy. Or he'll build you an absolute soulmate of a guitar. I play a Carparelli. You should too. All right, I think we're doing great so far. We have started with nothing and have generated something. So now we have some MIDI notes to work with. We have the basic beat that we would like, and then we can move on and start to fill out this drum arrangement, add some nuance, add some accents, and really make it bring the song to life. So let's move on to that. And you can imagine that if you play a song with different drummers, it's going to sound different. Because every drummer brings his or her own feel, own taste, own interpretation. And we want to take the art of this to a level, and we want to have the techniques available in order to exploit that. So that's going to lead us into the discussion about velocity. I want you to have this video for free, but if you've got $2 or $3 lying around and you can kick them over here, it helps me take time from my real job and do more of this. So find the link below, go to PayPal, select only the least of what you can afford, and just know that I'd really appreciate it. And we'll leave things like accents and ghost notes for just a little later, so put a pin in that because we're definitely going to come to that soon. All right, velocity. What is velocity? Well, it's basically just a representation of how hard you hit your instrument. So plucking a guitar string or slamming down a piano or not. And with drums, it's basically just how hard you hit the drum. And again, that changes two things. It changes the gain on the note and it changes the tonality. And that is what MIDI velocities are trying to represent, to take that sort of human interpretation and make it sound as natural as possible, or not. It depends what you want it to go. Maybe your music is played by robots. Who knows? The point is you have the flexibility in order to exploit that interpretation. So this is the art of this technique, and it's all about taste. There's no right or wrong here. There's no law. If it sounds good, it sounds good. Let's first compare the two beats that we have. So this is our basic beat that we have made, and you will notice that everything here is all the same color. In Logic, the color of the notes represents the velocity level. And if you look at your automation scale down here, you will see everything is at the same velocity. So that's a pretty flat and basic sounding note. It's even a little bit vanilla and robotic. So let's listen to it again. Let's compare it to the initial beat that I made. And if I highlight this one, you can see the varying range of velocities for these notes. The colors change, and it's a beat with a very different flavor. So the difference should be obvious to you. Now that we have sort of understood that to a general degree, let's think about our main drum loop here. One thing you want to do when you're laying out drums for a song is really try to get your main drum loop, the main beat that you are looking at, as close as possible to its final sound. The reason is that once you have laid it out and you've cut it up and added fills, if you need to go back and change it, it's extra steps, and it may lead to some niggling problems that will maybe drive you a little crazy. Just keep in mind that the benefit of looping your beat this way allows you to just change the first loop and it will affect the whole loop. So this is just repeating the loop. So anything you do in this loop will affect the whole loop. So that is one time-saving feature. You don't have to go into each bar or every 2 bars and change the whole thing. You can affect change by just changing the first loop. And that's another beauty of MIDI. You don't need to go back and re-record the whole song or something like that. Let's drill down on the velocity ranges on the parts of this drum kit. Here we have our kick. One question you may have is, what velocity range should you set your kick to? And again, there's no rule about that. However, you may want the kick to stand out in the rhythm, and you may want it to be a very light touch. One thing, if I'm not really sure how I want that to sound, I will just listen to the extremes and sort of find a middle ground. But you can expect to maybe go back and change that later. So let's do that. As an aside, let's take a look at a feature that Logic has for adjusting velocity. If you want to change the velocity of a group of notes all at the same time, highlight the group, and you can actually drag this line across, and it will scale all of the notes that you have highlighted. And you can even ramp like this or like this, and ramp a series of notes, which we will look at perhaps later. But generally, you want the kick to be at the same velocity. But again, that's not a rule. You can certainly vary the kick velocity for different reasons. I'm going to play the loop here. And as I do, I'm going to scale the velocity to different levels, and you can hear how it changes the sound. So from that little test, you can hear how at the maximum velocity of 127, the kick starts to sound a little bit offensive and overbearing. The low level which was below 20, it was barely audible. It was almost not there. In the middle, it starts to sound a little bit more pleasing to the ear. I think this song is going to sound better with a lighter touch because it has a heavy bass, and I don't want the kick competing with the bass too much. So I'm going to set it at around somewhere between 40 and 50, and that will probably sound good for this song. But keep in mind, for different parts of the song, if you're adding a fill, you may want the kick to go a little heavier and lighter. It really depends on what comes before and after. And that's, again, a matter of taste and interpretation. Right, let's go on to the snare. Now, the snare is an important part of the song. If you listen to what a lot of music producers say, and I'm certainly not a music producer, but they say there's two things that make the song, and that's the vocals and the snare. And you hear stories in the day about, a drummer and a producer spending an entire month working on a snare sound, and they sample 200 different snares, and et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of thought goes into it. And you can certainly hear that in modern music. The beat tends to weigh heavily on a song. So you may want to consider the snare a little more important, I guess is the word, than other parts of the drum kit. But again, a snare at a very high level can start to sound a little overbearing, and sometimes you just want a lighter touch. So let's do the same thing. I'm going to play the loop, adjust the snare velocities, and you can hear how it changes the sound. Right, you can hear that I kind of settled somewhere around the 80 range, 80 to 85. I started to think 100 sounded a little too heavy. But, again, it's a matter of taste. And there's certainly nothing stopping me from going back and changing that later. Because when you hear the whole thing in context, you sort of listen to it and decide, is this snare a little too heavy? The thing about your ear is that it will notice things at the beginning, but then after listening to it for a minute or two as you go through a song, you might think, oh, that snare is just starting to get offensive and overbearing, and you might want to pull it back a bit. Or you might find a really heavy, snappy snare is just holding the song together. Totally up to interpretation there. All right, let's think about the hi-hat. I sort of keep thinking that this song is a light touch in the drum area, so I'm probably going to lighten this hi-hat a bit, but let's listen to it and I'll scale through the velocity ranges again. So I settled on something around 40 because I don't want the hi-hat competing with the snare too much. I just want to hear it floating there in the mix. But that's the way I hear it. Somebody else might decide it sounds better otherwise, and they might be right. How do I know? So I hope that gives you an idea of how, in general, velocity will change the tonality and the impact of a certain part of the drum kit. To get your main beat set up, go through this process and try to set the levels of where you think it's going to end up. But keep in mind that you may come back and change these. All right, now that you're a master at note velocity and things are looking up, you're ready to move on to chapter 4. And this is where things get really interesting. We're going to look at adding accents and ghost notes and grace notes to try to fill out the beat and add some real dynamics. And this is where things get really good, as you can add the art of your beat and see your vision come to life. If you do have comments or questions, please put them in the comments below. I get back to everyone. You could also subscribe to the channel and you'll get notifications, of course, for future things if you think that might be helpful to you. Although I don't want money to be a reason why you can't follow this course and learn something. If you do have a couple of bucks, please find the link for PayPal below and throw it my way, and that helps me to do more. All right, let's meet up again in chapter 4. See you there.